Hey everybody, it's Ben, and welcome to week 2 of BroncoFIT 165. This week we're going to be talking about the 6 principles of strength and conditioning. So we're going to be jumping right in and getting some knowledge that we can apply right away in the weight room and with our workout programs. First thing that I want to show you here before we get started is a performance pyramid. Now you're not gonna be tested on any of this. I just like this performance pyramid because the pyramid shows that one thing builds on top of the other, which is going to be a major theme for this semester. It's going to be progressive overload, which just means that we're continuing to build on. We're not jumping from the bottom of the pyramid to the top of the pyramid. We have to take it step by step. So you can take a look at this. Like I said, I'm not going to get too into this, but obviously it starts with the movement fundamentals, which, you know, are the base for everything else that we're going to do. We then kind of get into strength and conditioning. What is it? The type of performance, and then we start actually getting into, working out and stuff like that. So, with that being said, let's jump into it. All right, we got some key terms first. And these are just so that you can understand the slides a little bit better, because some of these terms are brought up. So training. Training is a process of preparing an athlete physically, technically, tactically, psychologically, and theoretically rapidly for the highest level of performance. It goes much beyond simple growth and maturation of the athlete. So training is not just going around lifting some weights and getting big muscles. It is about preparing an athlete. And I like to say we're all athletes because we're all training for something in our life. You don't have to be training for a sport, but think of yourself as an athlete when you're in there in the gym. You have to have that mentality when you're in there to really get the most out of it. So it's more training is more than just about building up your physical aspect, but it's about building up your skills. It's building up your mental capacity. Um, so that's kind of what we talk about when we're talking about training. Volume. Volume is the amount of work performed. So sets and repetitions, you've probably heard that before, of an exercise combine to make volume. If you are running, the volume is the distance that you have covered. If you are strength training, the volume is the product of sets and repetitions of an exercise. So if I do 3 sets of 10, my volume is, you could see 30. And the sets would be how many times you go in, like how many times you pick up that weight, and repetitions is how many times, if you're doing a barbell curl, how many times you lift it up. So volume is a product of those two. It's how much you're lifting. Intensity is the difficulty of the work. It's the amount of weight or resistance used in the exercise. If you're a runner, the intensity is your running speed. If you're strength training, intensity is the resistance or weight lifted, and these all come straight out of the NSCA Basics of Strength and Conditioning Manual. Couple key terms continued. Volume load, so combining that volume key term that we just learned. Volume load is a combination of volume and intensity, so it's combining these two right here, volume and intensity. It's usually calculated as sets times repetitions, so volume multiplied by the weight / resistance used. So it might be like, if you do 3 sets of 10 with 10 pounds, it might be like 3 times 10 times 10, and that's your volume load, combining those two. And then frequency is simply just the number of training sessions expressed per day, per week, per month, and so forth. And here's an example of like a frequency table of somebody's training program. And again, coming straight out of the NSCA Basics of Strength and Conditioning Manual. So 6 principles of strength and conditioning. We have individuality, specificity, overload, progression, diminishing turns, and reversibility. We're going to talk about each of these individually because they're all equally important. The principle of individuality. Every individual is unique and will respond differently to the same training stimulus. Some of these differences can be influenced by many characteristics, such as biological age, training age, gender, body size and shape, past injuries, and more. All that's to say in here is that what works for somebody else might not work the same for you. What works for you might not work the same for somebody else. We are all individuals. Our bodies all react differently. So just understand that there's no perfect workout program out there. There's no perfect diet out there. Principle number 2, the principle of specificity. Training adaptations for an individual will occur specifically to the muscle groups trained. the intensity of the exercise, and or the specific movements or activities. In order to perfect a specific skill or activity, you must perform that skill or activity with proper body mechanics and have correct technique. So here we have a power lifter, for instance, is a world famous power lifter, and I don't know exactly how much weight she has on there right now. I think her name's Amanda Lawrence. But when she trains for powerlifting, she doesn't always train this heavy, but she practices deadlifts. She doesn't train to do this by going out and long distance running. She trains specifically in the weight room doing this movement in order to increase her capability of that movement. So you have to be specific in what you're trying to do. You can't expect to build strength if you're just running. You can't expect to build cardiorespiratory endurance if you're just lifting heavy weights. So you have to be very specific in what you're training for. The principle of overload. Mentioned this at the beginning. For an individual to achieve a certain training adaptation, the body must be stressed by working against a stimulus or load that is greater than which is to accustom. Overload ensures improvement by challenging changes in resistance, terrain, movement, complexity, and many others. To sum it all up, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. Our bodies, as I said in the previous lecture, are amazing organisms. They can learn to adapt so that they don't have to work as hard. Your body tries to put in the least amount of work so that it can, save its energy. But you need to force it. You need to force it to get uncomfortable. So if you're benching 100 pounds for 3 reps, you can't expect to get any stronger by continuing to bench 100 pounds for 3 reps. You have to try benching 100 pounds for 4 reps. You have to try benching 105 pounds for 3 reps. As you can see, you have to continue to overload, put more stimulus on your body in order to force it to change. Your body isn't going to willingly change. The principle of progression, and this ties directly into that overloading process. In order to achieve the desired training adaptations for a certain activity or skill consistently, the training stimulus must be gradually and consistently and constantly increased. This implies that there's an optimal level and time frame for overload to occur. If overload occurs too quickly, poor technique, improper muscle firing patterns, and injury may result. So you don't want to go too heavy too soon. You don't want to increase the reps too soon. If overload increases too slowly, improvements will be minimal or non-existent. But you also don't want to go too slow. So it's that fine balance of continuing to progressively overload by adding on more weight, but not so much that you're setting yourself up for failure, and not so little that you're not making any improvements. Rest and recovery is also a big part of the progression, as training hard all the time can result in chronic fatigue, a decrease in performance, and eventually injury. So I would say the biggest two that are going to keep coming back this semester is this idea of progressive overloads. Know what overload is and know what progression. Overload is just putting a higher stimulus on your body than what it's used to, and then progression is just continuing to increase that stimulus over time. A principle of diminishing returns. So I'm sure that we've all had this in real life, but performance gains are related to the level of training, talking about the training age of everyone. Athletes that have never participated in a training program before can see huge initial performance gains in their programs. So we talk about newbie gains or noob gains, is that people that have never lifted before, their body has never been exposed to that stimulus. There's going to be a huge change right off the bat. Where was I? On the other hand, athletes that have been lifting for several years will see smaller gains over longer periods of time. As an athlete nears their genetic potential, the gains in performance will be much harder to obtain. The key is to continue to show progress in the areas in which they have weaknesses. So example, here we got the college football team, we got the Broncos. These players are a lot younger, probably haven't been training or playing as long as the Seattle Seahawks. The Bronco players, Boise State football players, are more likely to make greater gains or greater improvements than the Seattle Seahawks players are, just because the Seattle Seahawks players have already made those improvements. They've been training for a lot longer. So just an idea, not saying that the Seattle Seahawks can't improve, the players can't improve, just that it might be a little bit harder than for younger players. And then the principle of reversibility: when a training stimulus is taken away from an athlete for an extended period, they will not be able to maintain a certain level of performance. Over time, the gains that were achieved will return to the original level. So again, you have to be consistent with it. Otherwise, if you get super swole and then you're like, sweet, I'm swole, I don't ever have to lift again, and then a year later you're like, oh wait, I'm just back to where I used to be. It's a lifestyle. It's got to be consistent. All right, and that's all we have for this week. It's not goodbye, it's see you later. That's a knee slapper. As always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email me or Dakota, and we'll be happy to help out. You guys have a great week.